All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Every now and then you hear these travel stories, and you just have to shake your head. They're the ones I'm talking about. The what were they thinking kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Sometimes it's just a simple misunderstanding of local customs. Sometimes, though, it's something a little more serious.
And that's what we're looking at today. A case of international travel, a surprising souvenir choice, and a run-in with wildlife protection laws.
Sounds intriguing. Lay it on me.
So we have a Canadian man who was arrested at Delhi airport. The reason? A crocodile skull found in his luggage.
A crocodile skull. Wow, okay. So right off the bat, we've got a situation that raises a lot of questions. I mean, was this an innocent mistake or something more deliberate?
Well, that's what we're going to try to figure out.
Hmm.
And to make things even more interesting, the man claims he bought the skull legally in Thailand. But, as we know, things aren't always that straightforward when it comes to international laws.
Absolutely.
Right.
Especially when it comes to wildlife. There are so many layers to consider. International agreements, protected species permits. The whole thing can get very complicated very quickly.
Exactly. So let's unpack this case piece by piece and see what we can learn. What happened? Where did it happen? And what are the implications for travelers and wildlife alike?
Sounds like a plan. Let's dive in.
All right, so first things first, the basics. We've got a 32-year-old Canadian man traveling through Delhi airport. This happened on Monday, when customs officials found the crocodile skull in his luggage. He was immediately arrested.
Okay, so we're talking about present day. This isn't some historical oddity. This is happening right now. And that's what I think makes this case so fascinating. It's a stark reminder that the intersection of personal travel and international law is something we all need to be aware of. These days, people are more mobile than ever, but that doesn't mean we can just disregard the rules and regulations of the countries we visit or the items we bring back with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the heart of the matter. The crocodile skull itself. We're not talking about some ancient fossil here. This was a baby crocodile skull.
Right.
Sharp teeth, the whole 9 yards. It was wrapped in cloths and weighed almost 2 pounds. Can you imagine pulling that out of someone's luggage?
I can't even imagine what went through the minds of the customs officials when they saw that. I mean, it's not every day you come across a crocodile skull in someone's carry-on. It definitely begs the question, why would someone even want a crocodile skull in the first place?
Right. Is it a curiosity? A collector's item?
Hmm.
Or is there something more to it? Could it be linked to the illegal wildlife trade? I mean, those are some pretty heavy implications.
They really are. And it's a good reminder that what might seem like an unusual souvenir to one person could actually be a piece of a much larger and often very dangerous puzzle. The illegal wildlife trade is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's fueled by demand for things like exotic animal parts, traditional medicines, fashion accessories, you name it.
It's a sobering thought for sure. And it's not like this guy was out there poaching the crocodile himself, at least according to him. He claims he bought it in Thailand.
Right, and that's where things get really tricky. Even if he purchased it legally in Thailand, bringing it into India is a whole other ballgame. And this is where India's Wildlife Protection Act comes into play.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What exactly does India's Wildlife Protection Act say?
Well, essentially, it prohibits the trade and possession of protected species, and that includes crocodiles. So even if this man had no intention of harming any wildlife himself by bringing that skull into India, he was breaking the law.
And it's not just India that has these kinds of laws, right? This is part of a much larger global effort to protect endangered species.
You got it. There's an international agreement called CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. It regulates the trade of thousands of plant and animal species across borders. So even if you buy something legally in one country, bringing it into another country that's also part of CITES might require permits, special documentation, all sorts of things.
So it's not as simple as I bought it legally, so it must be okay.
Nope, not at all. It's your responsibility to know the laws of both the country you're visiting and your home country. It's all about doing your research before you travel and being aware of what's allowed and what's not.
Now, there's one detail in this story that really caught my attention. The analysis of the skull itself. Authorities were able to determine that it was a baby crocodile just from looking at the skull. How is that even possible?
It's pretty amazing, isn't it? That's where wildlife forensic scientists come in. They're trained to identify species from skeletal remains. They can look at the size, the shape, the teeth, all sorts of things to figure out exactly what kind of animal it came from.
That's incredible. And I'm guessing that level of expertise is crucial in tracking poaching and trade routes.
Absolutely. By analyzing a skull like this, they can sometimes trace it back to the region where the crocodile was killed. It's like detective work, but for wildlife. They're using science to piece together the story of how that skull ended up in that man's luggage.
It's fascinating and a little bit unsettling when you think about it. But let's get back to the man's claims for a moment. He says he bought the skull, didn't hunt the crocodile himself, and didn't think he needed a permit.
And that's a common misconception, unfortunately. People assume that if they buy something from a shop or a market, it must be legal. But that's not always the case. And as we've already discussed, ignorance of the law is not a defense, it's the traveler's responsibility to be informed.
It's a tough lesson to learn, especially when you're facing serious consequences like arrest and legal action.
Yeah.
You know, this actually reminds me of another case at Delhi Airport a few years back. A Canadian woman tried to bring animal horns back from Ladakh. She said she found them and thought they would make a cool souvenir.
Oh, yeah, I remember that case. It just goes to show that this isn't an isolated incident. People see something unusual or unique, and they don't always think about the bigger picture, the impact their actions might have on wildlife populations, or the legal ramifications they could face.
Right? It's like we said earlier, what might seem like a harmless souvenir to one person could actually be a piece of a much larger problem.
Exactly. And it also raises a lot of ethical questions. What is our responsibility as travelers when it comes to interacting with wildlife and their habitats? Is it okay to take natural souvenirs, even if they're just things we find? Or should we be leaving everything as we found it?
Those are some great questions to ponder. I think the bottom line here is that we all need to be more mindful travelers. We need to educate ourselves about the laws and regulations surrounding wildlife. We need to consider the impact of our choices. And we need to remember that what might seem like a harmless trinket could actually be contributing to a harmful industry.
I couldn't agree more. It's about respecting the places we visit, the cultures we encounter, and the creatures that call those places home.
So to wrap things up, what are the key takeaways for our listeners today?
Well, first and foremost, when you're traveling internationally, be aware of the wildlife laws both at your destination and back home. Don't assume that something is okay just because it's for sale. What seems like a harmless souvenir could have serious consequences. Ignorance is not a defense.
And beyond the legal aspects, think about the ethical implications of buying wildlife products. Even if you're not directly involved in poaching, you could be contributing to the demand that fuels this industry.
Every purchase has a ripple effect. So be mindful. Choose souvenirs wisely. And when in doubt, leave it be.
Great advice. So the next time you're browsing those souvenir stalls, remember this story. Ask yourself, where did this come from? Is it legal? Is it ethical? And most importantly, is it worth the risk?
Food for thought, for sure.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll be back next time with another fascinating story from the world around us. Until then, stay curious and travel responsibly.
See you next time.